皆様大変お待たせいたしました。これより、シンポジアム時代のプリズム1989から2010まで今日の、展覧会実践と美術批評における影響のスペクトラムを、開始。
We will be beginning the symposium now. My name is Yun Jihye, and I am the curator of the National Art Center Tokyo. So as we begin, I would like to invite Head of Curatorial Division at National Art Center Tokyo, Jihye Kamiya. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon, Friday afternoon session symposium at NACT. My name is Jihye Kamiya, and I'm the head of curatorial division at NACT. On the first level, we are hosting an exhibition, Prism of the Real, 1989-2010, and we would like to do a symposium in relation to that, and it is entitled Tracing It's a Spectrum in Curatorial Practices and Art Criticism Today. So the exhibition, which has now been open for 2 months, it re-examines the dynamic and diverse expressions that emerged in Japan over the 20 years from 1989 amid sweeping social, economic, political transformations. We have received responses describing the artist's challenges as the era as fresh, alongside comments like nostalgic. In our daily lives, surrounded by a constant stream of new events and information, we might say we live within a great forgetting brought about by the passage of time. The feeling of nostalgia arrives precisely when a moment from that past is illuminated once again. The act of curation in creating exhibitions, as well as academic research, and the act of criticism that formulates discourse are all ways of reflecting upon the past, of casting light upon it before it is solidified into history within a process of experience and forgetting. The symposium provides an opportunity to consider how the artistic and critical endeavors of the 1990s and 2000s challenge and influence us today through the presentations of 3 panels. Jihye Yun, Hiroki Yamamoto, and Azusa Hashimoto. Each of these panelists has not only researched the period highlighted in this exhibition, but also been actively engaged in the subsequent decades, contributing to the next generation of art discourse. Rather than viewing their work as a retrospective from different generations or periods, we hope this will be an opportunity to reflect upon the cumulative experiences surrounding art since 1989 and to contemplate the influences, issues that expressions and criticisms of the era continue to present. We are pleased to welcome from M+ Hong Kong, our curatorial partner for this exhibition, Mr. Doryun Chong, and Ms. Isabella Tam. Also, Ms. Jihye Yun from the National Art Center Tokyo, who will be joining the discussion. So we invite you to participate with us over the next 2 hours. Kamiya-san, thank you so much. So let's move on. I would like to invite Doryun Chong, artistic director from M+, and he's also the curatorial director for this exhibition. He's the chief curator M+.
Thank you, everyone, for being here on a weekday at the end of a work week. And I know that it's also a very busy week as part of the Art Week Tokyo. So we really appreciate you taking very precious time out of your very, very busy schedule. And I can also see that many eminent professionals in our museum and art world are here. So thank you for all of your interest in this very meaningful project. So I would just take a few minutes to give you a bit of a background information and an overview of the exhibition. I assume that many of you have already seen the exhibition. But before I do that, I should also echo the words of thanks and acknowledge and express my thank you to, of course, Director Osaka Eriko of National Arts Center, Jihye Kamiya, the chief curator, but also part of this curatorial team, Yun Jihye, one of the curators of the exhibition, my colleague from M+, Isabella Tam, and also those who very much help with the coordination around the project. So Ko Mi-ryung and also Yoshino Ritsu and then our curatorial assistant, Isawa Takuto, and our assistant, Anessa Chen, who's also here. So you can see it's a long list of names who made this exhibition happen that we worked on very intensely for almost 3 years. Now, the exhibition Prism of the Real, 1989 to 2010, Making Art in Japan, 1989 to 2010. But before I talk about the exhibition, I should just give you a little bit of context and information about why M+ in Hong Kong is part of this project at all. The reason is that Japan plays a very, very important role in M+'s collection and programming. We have been open, actually our birthday is November 12th, so next week we will be celebrating our 4th anniversary, so we are a very new institution. But before opening in 2021, the whole project has been going on for almost a decade. So during that time, we built the collection and really thought about how this new kind of global institution thinks of art history and history of visual culture transnationally. In that context, Japan within Asia especially plays an important role. So I'm just giving you some examples of Japan in our programming and collection. So our very first special exhibition 1 year after our opening was Yayoi Kusama Retrospective, which I think was the largest retrospective in Asia following the one at NACT, which I think was 2012 or something around that time. Very successful exhibition that also traveled to the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao and Serralves Museum in Porto, in Portugal. We also had an exhibition last year of Morimura Yasumasa with American artist Cindy Sherman, a 2-person dialogue exhibition. And then also you can see an installation view of a focused survey exhibition of I.O., which I think was also the first time that his work was shown in Asia outside of Japan. Almost on permanent display, we have 2 pieces of architecture and urban legacy from Tokyo, specifically Ginza, with a Kyotomo sushi bar, and a capsule from the Nakagin Capsule Tower in our collection gallery almost permanently. Now, following that, earlier this year, between March and July, we made a group exhibition called Picasso for Asia, A Conversation, in collaboration with the National Picasso Museum in Paris. And the image that you see on the left is one of the artists who participated, who is Tanami Keiichi, of course, another familiar name, who had a big exhibition here last year, just before his passing. We have more than 36 paintings that he made around Picasso, which was the last body of work that he created. We also currently have this installation work by Liu Fan, which was actually made for the artist retrospective that was here at NACT in 2022, and it's currently on view. One of the artists in the Prism of the Real exhibition, Miyazima Tatsuo, we have also a major work in our collection. So the middle one and the right image are currently on view at the museum. So I hope that already gives you a sense of the very close connection that we have with the Japanese post-war and contemporary art history, but also specifically with the National Art Center, Tokyo. So the exhibition, when the invitation came with the brief of thinking about an interpretive framework, a couple of things became immediately very clear and very important. One is to think about the time frame, and because the brief mentions that the exhibition should be about a recent history of contemporary art in Japan. And for me, looking back also on the history of many exhibitions that have happened in Japan and outside of Japan about Japan, that we have covered now 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, but there haven't been many projects, or actually not many projects at all, about the 1990s and 2000s. So, of course, 1989 is a very important year in Japan. but also globally, because of course it's a change of the imperial era that happened in Japan, but the end of the Cold War that happened globally. So 89 is a clearly important year. 2010 was selected not just because it's a round number, but it's the year before, of course, the great earthquake that happened in Tohoku region, which of course was such a major event in the country. So we decided to focus on that almost 20-year period. Second thing that was very important in our conceptualization is not to say that this exhibition is about Japanese contemporary art, but contemporary art being made in and about Japan. So we didn't want to make a national art exhibition, but it should have Japanese national artists, nationalities, I should say, but also artists of different nationalities. So exhibition is divided into 3 sections, preceded by 2 sections, starting with the prologue, which is drawn mostly from the archival materials at the National Art Center around the Anzai Shigeo's photo archive, the great photo documentarian of the art world and all the activities. We go a little bit further back than 1989 to remind people how international and open and welcoming the Japanese art world was. So one important event is Nam June-paik and Joseph Beuys being here in 1984. And here are some other examples of the great projects and important artists who made works in Japan, from Christo to Thomas Struth. Then we start with an introduction, which we call a critical turn. There is a remarkable convergence of new talents and new kinds of artistic languages that emerged around 1989 to 1990, including this great work by Morimura, and then other names from Yanagi Yukinori to Murakami Takashi. And then there is no obvious commonality between these works other than that they are all extremely strong artworks. So what happened that all of these new kinds of expressions emerged? So we want to now throw that question mark to the audience before providing the 3 prismatic lenses, if you will. The first is called The Past is a Phantom, which is really looking at history, the trauma of history, but also enduring legacy of what happened after World War II, but also atomic bombing. This work was in the exhibition by Aida Makoto. Now it has been replaced by another work, which I also encourage you to see if you haven't seen. But how artists continue to reflect upon and make sense of what happened in history. So these are the artists who are included, of course, very well-known name like Nara Yoshitomo, but also British artist Simon Starling is included here. Then second section looks at the idea of identity, well, I should say subject of identity, especially around gender identity. We were also focusing on how this period is often characterized as the period of the 3rd wave of feminism. So how feminism really emerged as a very important methodology and language, but also about cultural identity, what Japanese culture means internationally, inspiring group of artists like Philippe Areno and Pierre Huyghe to make works around a stock manga character. So here are the names, very well-known name like Mori Mariko, as well as Matthew Barney, who made a major project in Japan. And then we end the exhibition with the 3rd thematic section, which is called A Promise of Community. Especially from the late 1990s into the 2000s, contemporary art provided an opportunities to imagine new possibilities for alternative community. And these 3 artists from Japan, South Korea, and China coming together to form an artist collective was perhaps something that had never happened in the previous decades. But there are many other efforts individually or collectively trying to form temporary or sometimes enduring possibilities of connection. So these are the 3 main themes that run throughout this exhibition to give you a sense of what things will look like. And as Kamiya-san said, a lot of people found this refreshing but also familiar. And I think that's exactly the kind of sense that we hope to invoke by looking back on this recent history, but also, it's already 30 years ago. So, the history, it is a history. So that's just a very quick run through of the exhibition. And like you, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our 3 young scholars and curators and how they thought of this exhibition and how it is relevant to them. So thank you very much.
ドリアンさんありがとうございました。
Doryun, thank you. Then we would like to invite Isabella Tam, curator from M+. She's the visual art curator, and myself, Jihye Yun, curator from NACT. We would like to.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Isabella Tam from M+, curator of M+. As Doryun just already gave introduction of the exhibition, but what I would think I would be able to offer before we really kind of start the discussion is really to give a little bit more about like the behind the scene or like a bit of the earlier researches as we are kind of trying to frame the exhibition time frame of 1989 to 2010 and also like the very the curatorial approaches that we adopted with this exhibition. So in parallel, when we're thinking about the time, we also kind of conducted some quite extensive researches about the exhibition that is surrounding Japan, inside and also outside Japan. And here is really just a number of the examples that we found that is really critical, but also at the same time is really interesting to inform the way how we prepare our curatorial thesis. For example, like the Against Nature Japanese art in the 1980s. There is an exhibition created by the Komodo Shinji and Fumio Nanjo and also Kathy Calbridge. And also like the Primal Spirit, which is an exhibition that is originated from Hara Museum, but also toured to the North America to 4 different countries in 1919. And also a Cabinet of Sign, which is also an exhibition in 1991 that were held in 3 different venues across the UK. And these 3 exhibitions really kind of the first time to introduce a very refreshing type of Japanese contemporary art other than like the post-war mono-ha work to the international audience. So for example, artists like Morimura Yasumasa and also Hiroshi Sugimoto, Emiko Kasahara, Tatsuo Miyajima, artists who we introduced in this exhibition, they were also kind of having a lot of international exposure through this exhibition. And then following that, at the same time, we can see that the Japan Foundation is playing a very increasing important role. And then with the project like the Under Construction, which is also a co-curation among Japanese curator and also international curator to think about the Asia, the building of Asia in the 2000s. And then in parallel, we can see there are a couple other examples that within Japan, like the Super Flat exhibition that was originally from Murakami to trying to blend the Japanese traditional art with manga and anime coming from Japan and then became so popular internationally. And at the same time, we also see that in the more recent year that institution within Japan, for example, the National Museum of Art in Osaka, that they did an exhibition really thinking about historicizing about this period, like in 1980s in Japan with the New Wave Japanese Contemporary Art exhibition, or even more recent is like the Heisei, Bubbles and Debris art of the Heisei period from 1989 to 2019. So these are really kind of like a sample of the many exhibitions, really kind of informing about what is how Japan is really kind of presented in those exhibitions, and what are the opportunity and ways that we can contribute for these exhibitions. So as a result, it really kind of informing the way on how we kind of creating this mind concept on looking at different layers of exhibition history that you can see from the green boxes with a number of the exhibitions that I have already mentioned, but also like the role of institution, whether it's private and also public institutions has made. And these are the names that are floating on the blue blue lines, that we can already see in that back in the 1980s, like I see in Nagoya or even like a private initiative like Gallery Shimada, they're already beginning to introduce international artists in conversation with Japan. And then later on, and we can see in that like the Hiroshima Museum of Contemporary Art opened in 1989, again, really kind of reaffirming our curatorial thesis, thinking about 1989 is also a very important marker when we think about our exhibition. And continually, you will see like there was like a museum and also art boom in Japan with different contemporary museums are opening, including the Fukuoka Asian Art Museums as well. And then in parallel, we are also kind of thinking about like what are the major artistic practice and also art trend that is happening in Japan. So obviously our research really kind of showing you the tendency of artists interested in pop and interesting in the relational aesthetics or like the collaboration and also the role of the body and also the theater. So with all these three layers, we are really kind of guiding the way on how we can select the artwork and also the way how we really structure the free curatorial lenses, trying to inform it not just about the one specific work, but how the work can also tell some of this, the role of this institution and also like the exhibition history has made.
Okay. 時間節約のためにこのまま続けます。
So let me continue. So Doryun and Isabella explained about this exhibition and also the past exhibitions which we referenced. So I would like to explain about the composition of this exhibition, Prism of the Real, and looking at the curatorial lenses, we would try to tie that in with the speakers we have invited today to see what they would be speaking during the symposium today. So I will also, as a segue, introduce them as well. So we start with 1989 and look at the next two decades, not just Japanese contemporary art, but art that was born in Japan. Therefore, we don't just focus on the Japanese artists, but we also look at the non-Japanese artists who have used Japan as a platform to do their work. So this is an exhibition that's introducing the art over 2 decades. And when we look at this history of 20 years, we don't want it to be chronological, but we wanted to have 3 curatorial lenses. So these are the 3 themes, the pillars at which we work with, and we could use to make it the composition of this exhibition. So the first lens is called The Past is a Phantom. I think in the art scene, we see words like ghosts and phantom, and we have in Japan, I think these are the key words that's really important when we speak about art in Japan. So who will speak about the past phantom? We have this issue of subject. And so let me quickly introduce Cho Sune, who will speak on this subject of the past is phantom. So Cho Sune was born in 1986 in Tokyo, and between her expertise, she worked as a curator at the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum from 2016 to 2025. She specializes in modern and contemporary Asian art, particular interest in artistic expressions by the minority individuals or communities in Asia. She conducts research in artistic expressions of diaspora, referring to immigrants and migrants. And she was a curatorial advisor for Aichi Triennial. And she has, in the recent years, curated MAM collection at Mori Art Museum. for it's a collection exhibition of Shitamichi Michio, which is also we showcase here in this exhibition. She also has done exhibitions, curations for Asian photo history, waters in Asian art. So let me invite Cho-san without further ado. So Cho-san, please come to the stage.
Hello everyone. My name is Chosune. I'm currently an associate curator at the Marine Art Museum, but until this spring, I worked as a curator at the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum in Fukuoka Prefecture. And so during the spring of 2023, and so John Doryun and colleagues from the National Art Center Tokyo visited our museum in the summer of 2023 to discuss research for this exhibition. It feels like just happened yesterday. Because of this, I was able to have this opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So let me begin with my presentation. So this Prism of the Real exhibition offers a comprehensive overview of trend in Japanese contemporary art emerging during the significant transitional period in the Japanese society from 1989 to 2010. This era witnessed major shifts across political, economic, and cultural spheres, including the end of the Cold War structure, globalization, and advent of the information society. With the realm of art, it was also a period marked by the re-examination of the post-war value, where Japanese contemporary art was being questioned anew with emerging discussions. At this symposium, as one of the speakers, I was given the opportunities to present in response to the section titled Curatorial Lens 1, The Past is a Phantom. In this presentation, I wish to respond to the theme of the past is a phantom by devolving into the artist's practice of the exhibiting artist, while also turning our gaze outward towards those on the periphery, such as the existence of the diaspora. I hope this presentation will foster a more open discussion about the exhibition and provide an opportunity to interpret contemporary art born in Japan in a more multi-layered way. And Ms. Hangan, the Korean writer who became the first Asian woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, delivered her Nobel lecture titled Light and Threat at the Swedish Academy in Stockholm on December 7, 2024. During her lecture, Ms. Hangan shared the words she wrote on the first page of every new diary she started. Can the present help the past? Can the living save the dead? I would like to begin this presentation with these words. Using the history depicted by Hangan through the medium of the novel as a reference point, I wish to examine that the concept of the past is a phantom signifies. The phrase, the past is a phantom, carries multiple meanings. The first interpretation can be understood as the past as an entity that haunts the present. It means that memories of the past wars and colonial rules, the psychological trauma etched into individuals and society, and the voices that were suppressed and never told continue to exert tangible force even now, influencing people's consciousness and social structures. These ghostly phenomena, as a persistence of the past, exist as an invisible foundation shaping our present, transcending temporal discontinuity. Furthermore, the past as a phantom can be conceptually reinterpreted as a ghost of history. History can be understood not as a series of completed events, but as a presence that continues to call us back and question us even in the present. From this perspective, we can say history is not over. history continues to live within us even now. By replacing past with history in this way, it becomes clear how the artists selected for this section each confront history from their respective standpoints and put their artistic theories into practice. Artist works present history not as a fixed past, but as a present force that continues to generate itself even now. After the Meiji Restoration, Japan designated Shinto as the state religion to build a modern nation and establish a new identity for the era. Later, as part of the imperialization policy, numerous shrines were built in Asian countries and the Mariana Island that Japan colonized. To confront this history, Motoki Shimunchi embarked on a journey from 2006 to 2012 seeking traces of the Pacific War beyond Japan's borders. He gradually narrowed his focus to the torii gates of shrine dedicated to the deities of Shinto. After the war, the main halls of shrines in countries colonized by Japan were demolished. Yet, Shitamichi focused on the fact that some torii gates remain to this day, having lost their symbolic functions, and continued photographing them while traveling. The resulting series, Torii, visualizes how geopolitical boundaries like borders and territories, along with the boundaries of histories and ideology, quietly dissolved into the people's daily life as a fragment of history, coexisting within them. Through Shitamichi's lenses, we can clearly recognize the fact that history is not a completed event of the past, but continues to shape our present. As an alternative approach to Shitamichi, I examined the work of Tomoko Yoneda. Tomoko Yoneda has consistently focused her photographic practice on invisible history and memory latent within the places and object. In 2009, at the Gwangju Biennale in Taipei, she presented a work featuring Japanese-style house built during the colonial era. This series captures spaces where personal memory and historical memory intersect, imprinted in photographs through the layers of time superimposed upon these Japanese houses. The Japanese houses depicted in this work are those where historical figures actually resided, including the former residence of General Wan Xiuming, who served as the chief of staff under the Chiang Kai-shek administration, and the home of the daughters of Suzuki Kantaro, who was prime minister at the end of the Pacific War. These buildings have not been demolished, but renovated by the local residents and continue to be used as a living space today. Yoneda's photographs tell the stories of how Japanese houses blend into the people's daily lives and endure through the evolution of these structures. Here, one can observe the complex interplay of Japanese and continental cultures, where the influences of modernization and westernization blend in intricate ways. Through this lens, Yoneda visualizes the textures and memories brought by colonial history, illuminating the shared historical time between Japan and Taiwan from the transnational perspective. Yoneda's work sharply confronts us with the questions: what does it mean to engage with history? What Shitamichi and Yoneda share is that, while starting from the framework of Japan, they both confront through photography the historical experience of colonialism existing between Japan and the world, and the complex relationship that arises from it. Their work transcends photography as a visual record and can be positioned as a critical practice exploring intersection of memory and history. Next, I would like to examine the practice of Chikako Yamashiro, who approaches this issue from Okinawa's perspective as an attempt to re-examine the very framework of Japan. Chikako Yamashiro is an artist born in Okinawa who continues to base her practice there, using performance, video, and photography as a primary media. She has consistently explored themes of Okinawan's history and memory from a post-colonial perspective. Okinawa, where Yamashiro was born and raised, is widely known as an island with a rich nature and beautiful coastlines, particularly for its tourism. However, the colonial history behind it is often overlooked. Originally the Ryukyu Kingdom, which has developed its own unique culture and political system, Okinawa was annexed by Japan at the end of the 19th century and became Okinawa Prefecture. Towards the end of the Pacific War, it experienced the only major ground battle fought on Japanese soil, resulting in devastating catastrophe that claimed the lives of over 300,000 people. After the war, Okinawa was placed under American rule and returned to Japan in 1972. After approximately 30 years of occupation, however, even today, about 70% of the U.S. military bases in Japan are concentrated in Okinawa, and the imbalance of the post-war structure and the lingering echoes of colonialism continue to cast a shadow over the local community. The deep shadow of history still coexists within Okinawa society. Forced modernization, the scar of war, subordination to the mainland, and exploitation tourism. It is precisely these circumstances that form the fundamental motivation for Yamashiro's expression. In its early 2000s, Yamashiro's career began with attempts to performatively visualize the distance and conflict between herself and Okinawa through the lens of video. In I Like Okinawa Suite, a part of Yamashiro's early Okinawa tourist series, filmed herself leaning against the fence of the U.S. military base under the rule of performing a specific action in front of the camera. She possibly accepted and ate an ice cream endlessly. In front of the National Diet Building, she displayed photo panels of Okinawa's distinctive tortoise shell homes, shouting out Okinawa's tourist appeal as if demonstrating it in a performance titled Journey to Japan. And through works like Graveyard Geisha, which capture dances wearing paper bags over their heads to block their vision, yet continuing to dance desperately. Yamashiro confronts Okinawa's economic and political realities, such as bases and tourism, and even the cultural and spiritual dimensions of celebration and the dead. By layering these realities, she shaked the very boundaries as severed by history, making them visible and provocatively question these anew. Yamashiro's practice attempts to transform the structure that has pushed Okinawa into a peripheral position since Japan's modern era, not merely through individual narratives, but by shifting that very peripherality itself into the critical perspective. Yamashiro's work disrupts binary opposition, center and periphery, subject and other, state and individual, and forcibly interrogate how the very framework of Japan can be reconsidered. And so Yuki Kamiya, Chief Curator of the National Art Center Tokyo, who served as a coordinating curator for this exhibition, stated that following in her essay for the exhibition catalog. Faced with the question of whether Japanese contemporary art can break free from the constraint of conventional and limited nationality, this exhibition attempts as a first step to consider artistic expression born in Japan and to consciously explore the potential and perspective for expanding the framework of limited nationality. I myself deeply endorse this endeavor and wish to propose an alternative perspective on the very act of selecting and narrating the history of Japanese contemporary art. This is also an attempt to construct a multi-layered and transnational discourse on art that cannot be reduced solely to the national framework. Philosopher Kunichi Uno defined minority in his book Minorities Create as follows. The tree of the majority functions through centrality, uniformity, duality, symmetry, homogeneity, and hierarchy. Yet, whether arboreal dominance exists, one can invariably discover another organization like Greece that rejects centrality and uniformity, operating instead on the principles of diversity and heterogeneity. Without it, the majority itself might fall into the crisis. A minority is an organization based on diversity as its principle, even before being defined by the particular identity. At this exhibition, I would like to deliberately point out that artists possessing the minority identity defined by UNO are extremely few in number. The term minority here refers to individuals who have been marginalized based upon social attributes such as ethnicity, nationality, race, skin color, lineage, family background, gender, sexuality, disability, illness, age, or religion. Among these, I would like to focus particularly on the Zionist Koreans who have lived in post-war Japan in numbers, reaching approximately 2 million and have been positioned as the closest others within the Japanese society. Through the artists' practices of Korean artists residing in Japan, I wish to reconsider what constitutes artist expression born in Japan, its conceptual scope, and its historical context. This is an attempt to reconstruct the discourse of Japanese art itself, not by examining art history formed within the frame of the nation state, but by revealing the inherent patterns of difference and intersection within it. Ko Seon-jun, a former chief curator of the Niigata Prefectural Bandai Island Museum of Art, who passed away at the age of 40, wrote the following about the state of Zionist Korean art in Japan in the catalog for the exhibition Arilan Flower Seas Asian Migrant Artists, held at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Korea in 2009, and themes around the Korean diaspora. Within Japanese society, the existence of Zionist Koreans has been treated as an institutional handicap or as a problem concerning how to shape ethnic identity. While it was something to be overcome, advocating for it did not become an advantage within the Japanese art world. The attempt to re-examine the identity of art by artists residing in Japan naturally took on political overtones, significantly an international departure from the context of Japanese contemporary art history. Thus, a discourse surrounding Korean artists residing in Japan remains difficult to position naturally within the context of Japanese contemporary art history. Furthermore, as a curatorial approach, the stance of selecting only one artist possessing minority attributes as if to guarantee diversity and relying on that individual presence to ensure the inclusivity of the whole cannot be considered a fundamental solution. What should be attempted in today's curatorial practice is how to introduce the perspective of the other from within the very act of selecting and narrating history. In the present day, where nationality, race, and religious consciousness are intensifying within the political and social context, how can we reconstruct our relationship with the others who exist close to us? This very question, I believe, is a fundamental issue concerning the ethics and practice of curation in the contemporary arts. Finally, I would like to conclude by discussing the small-scale yet ongoing practice I have been engaged in. Since around 2020, I have been working under the concept of outsider art as my guiding principle. The starting point for this idea was encountering the book by a botanist Inagaki Hidehiro titled The Outlier Drive Evolution, The Secret of Individuality in Living Things. The book contains the passage, "In the actual natural world, there is no such thing as an average value. There is no normal either. What exists is diversity, the existence of the wide variety of things." This book clearly explains, based upon the scientific findings, how plants and animals possessing unique characteristics, often labeled as oddballs, have developed survival strategies that support biodiversity and evolution. I believe this perspective that outsiders drive evolution reveals a universal principle that also applies to art. Deviations from mainstream norms, this otherness, have often been pushed to the margins, yet they have quietly shaken the foundation of art, giving rise to new perspectives and narratives. The art of the outsiders is not merely an affirmation of difference. It is an attempt to find richness within the creative friction that difference generates and to explore the potential for evolution hidden within it through the practice of art. When we view history from the perspective of the passer's phantom, we must not merely remain in a position of selecting and narrating others. Rather, we need to explore ways of incorporating the perspective of others from within history itself, co-creating with them. In other words, it is an attempt not to reproduce the other as an external entity, but to visualize the authority inherent within the very structure of history itself, and to explore the possibility of coexistence within it. This practice of attempting imagination for coexistence from within seems to me to be one of the most essential roles art can fulfill in today's society, where division and inclusion are becoming increasingly apparent. In this presentation, I would like to conclude by proposing such a perspective as a response to curatorial lens. The past is a phantom. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
本展プリズム
Then next is on the second chapter, Lens 2, on self and others. We have invited Hiroki Yamamoto to do a presentation. So Mr. Yamamoto actually has done so. I think I mentioned earlier that the words such as phantom and ghost is a word that we often hear these days. But I think identity is something that we also hear these days, especially it just sounds very 90-ish. And you find, but in the recent concept, I think there's a word called identity politics, which sounds somewhat negative. So I think identity is a very difficult theme to discuss. So he has a practice on reviewing the curatorial practices and art criticisms of today. And so let me quickly introduce his profile. He's the cultural studies scholar, associate professor at Jihye Women's University, born in Chiba in 1986. He graduated from Hitotsubashi University in social science. He went to get his MA in fine arts at Chelsea College of Arts. He obtained his PhD at University of the Arts, London. After working at Hong Kong Polytech University, he went and did a postdoc at Tokyo University, also assistant professor and lecturer at Kanazawa College of Art. He single-authored publications such as History of Contemporary Art, Art of Post-Anthropocene, Introduction to Contemporary Art. He also has done co-editing De-Imperializing Japanese Art History. He also translated art and engagement in early post-war Japan into Japanese. In terms of his curatorial practice, in 2024, he was the curator for the Japan Pavilion at the 15th Gwangju Biennale. So Yamamoto-san, please, I will hand it over to you. Thank you. I have two objectives today. I have this habit of drinking water, and I tend to forget what I was speaking about every time I take a drink. So I want to make sure I don't take any sip this time. And also the other point is to stay with time because I tend to overspeak. I know that Cho-san and Hashimoto-san and myself too, but we're not here to teach you, but I'm here to first of all present my idea, and I want to make sure we have time to discuss it. So my aim is to make sure I stick with my memo. So thank you. So the title is Identity Possible, and you will know the answer to that question at the end. So in response to the section, Self and Others, I'd like to discuss whether the concept of identity has lost its validity as an analytical framework for understanding contemporary art practice and their possibilities. So what does identity indeed mean? Opening the Iwanami Dictionary of Philosophy and Thought, I find this definition as something that remains unchanged amid change. That is identity's definition. Yet the notion that identity is something immutable, I think, has now lost its support. Irving Goffman, in the presentation of self in everyday life, known in Japanese under the title Acts and Performances, argued that human beings within a social stage are constantly engaged in performing certain self-images, reinterpreting everyday activities as interactions woven between performers and audiences. Goffman treated the performances people enacted as objects of sociological analysis while excluding from his research the real self said to lie behind those performances, that is, in the backstage of the stage, or put differently, in the depth of the mind as a domain of psychology. As Anne-Marie Moll points out, underlying his thinking is the opposition between the surface appearance and deep reality within identity. In Gender Trouble 1990 by Judith Butler, focuses particularly on the perspective of gender, claimed that human identity does not pre-exist performance, but rather emerges through and within performance itself. And here the opposition in Anne-Marie Moll's sense between surface appearance and deep reality within identity actually disappears. In Butler's view, to borrow Goffman's metaphor, identity is not something that exists backstage, but something that is incessantly fabricated through the performance taking place on stage. Butler's concept of performativity calls into question the view that identity is determined at some point in life, usually quite early, and remains fixed once established. Identity in this conception is not a pre-given, static entity, but a dynamic practice that is constantly enacted. It is perpetually unstable construct open to the possibility of transformation. At the same time, however, the degree of freedom and mutability of identity differs between majorities and minorities, and attention must be paid to such asymmetries of power. So let me take up and start with an examining OR 1997 performance and video work by Damtai. This piece was created based on notes left by Teiji Furuhashi, one of the group's founder, before his death from AIDS. In his notes, Furuhashi wrote of the border between self and non-self and the gray zone between life and death. In OR, the striking contrast between the silence of the performers lying on movable beds evoking the dead and the dynamic movements of the surrounding performance is deeply affecting. The work also seems to serve as a requiem for Furuhashi, who passed away before seeing its completion. It is easy to understand why, having over the threshold between life and death, Furuhashi has been preoccupied with the gray zone between life and death, but how and from where did his concern with this border between self and non-self arise? I can surmise that this interest is closely tied to the particular nature of AIDS as a disease. Here I refer to Alexander Garcia's Dutman's reflections on the AIDS. AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is a disease in which the very cells originally responsible for protecting the body gradually lose their immune function and turn against it as enemies. In other words, in AIDS, the enemy does not arrive from outside, it exists within from the beginning. The classic binary opposition of friend versus foe thereby loses its validity here. Thus, Koji Otake, translator of Dutman's Friendship and Enmity 1999, describes this radical enemy as one that it itself split, making it impossible to determine whether it belongs to the world beyond or to the world. In Otake's words, AIDS is a disease that produces a rupture in its own identity as one and the same. And from this perspective, it becomes understandable that in the process of AIDS progression, where the normal cells that were once part of the self began to rebel one after another, transforming it to controllable others, Furuhashi became drawn to the border between self and non-self. The self inherently contains the other. Drawing on philosopher Koichiro Kobu's notes, the consciousness of the self cannot arise without another against which to affirm its own identity, and therefore the self is constituted through an other structure. AIDS exposes the presence of other inherently contained within self. So let's now turn to another Damtai seminal work, SNN, in 1994. This piece was created by Furuhashi from the United States and and came out with his fellow members after his AIDS diagnosis, an event that became a starting point for the work. And as its title, Signal Noise, suggests SM provokes the authority and mechanisms that differentiate and archetypes what counts as audible signal within society from what is dismissed as inaudible noise, those small voices that are violently erased. SN critically questions the existence of norms that divide majority and minorities, along axes such as gender, sexuality, ability, producing discrimination. In relation to the earlier discussion on the concept identity, Keiko Takeda analyzes that SN neither fixes nor limits identity, nor does it compel entry into identical communities. Rather, it demonstrates the possibility of solidarity grounded in a certain form of communality and provides a condition for it. At the same time, Takeda also points out, SM produces fractures not only within the identity of the self, but also within the identity of society itself. This recalls the societal political potential of social engaging art that Claire Bishop foregrounds in her essay Antagonism and Relational Aesthetics. In that essay, Bishop argues through examples such as Santiago Sierra and Thomas Hirschhorn's works, that avant-garde art exposes the fissures that a society represses and renders invisible in order to sustain a facade of harmony. The existence of such fissures undermines the legitimacy of the norms that the majority take for granted as self-evident. Among the various norms destabilizing SN, heteronormativity is particularly shaken in its university. The fact that this work emerged from the discourse surrounds AIDS is deeply connected to the critique of heteronormativity. Because AIDS was widely observed among the young gay men, it was initially labeled as GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. The disease is suspected to be caused by lifestyle male homosexuals in American society condemned and sought to regulate their sexual behavior. Homophobia became visible in the public sphere. Against this backdrop, AIDS activism movements such as ACT UP emerged, opposing the homogeneity of society represented by heteronormativity. So next is on Lee Bo, Sorry for Suffering. And let me now take up this artist who was born in South Korea. In this exhibition, not only artists born and raised in Japan, but also works created in Japan by overseas artists connected to Japan are featured. This curatorial policy is significant in that it invites others who unsettle the identity of the national or nation state of Japan. So in Lee Bo's Sorry for Suffering, Do You Think I'm a Puppy on a Picnic, performed at the Japan Korea Performance Festival, Lee herself donned a bizarre costume with multiple appendages, tentacle-like limbs that constrained her movements, and wandered through the streets of Japan and Korean cities. A leaflet published at the time included the words, "Oh, immutable authority, Father, oh, you fathers who have seized my legs and shaken them in frenzy." At this statement implies the work is a sharp protest against patriarchy, an ideology that deprived women of both voice and rights prevailing not only in Japan and also in Korea. Patriarchy deprives women not only of spiritual freedom but also bodily freedom. In his unfinished arcades project, Walter Benjamin identified as the modern subject the figure who can move freely and aimlessly through the city, whom he called the flaneur. Yet, as Rebecca Solnit shows in her writings, women have in most cases been excluded from this category of subject. Through injunctions such as don't go there, don't do that, patriarchal ideology attempts to dictate where and when women's bodies may exist. This stands in stark contrast to men's bodies, which are presumed free to do whatever, whenever, wherever they wish. By transforming herself into this grotesquely deformed body, Lee stands as a foreign object within male-centered patriarchal society grounded in identity. What is essential is not to adapt compliantly, but to persistently as an anomaly. Here, I'd like to highlight one activist responding to criticism that in the 1970s women's liberation movement was difficult to understand. One of its central figures, Mitsu Tanaka, rejected the accusation, asserting, "Those who are in pain now don't have the luxury to explain themselves clearly to others. The very confusion in our language, our life itself." Tanaka claimed that the right to exist as different human beings within the same world, literally human rights without being forced into understandability or normative conformity. So Lee's distorted body, standing boldly yet awkwardly in the urban spaces of Korea and Japan as an alien presence, seems to embody a similar claim. What then are the artists gathered in the section Self and Others attempting to do through their works? Let's consider this question through the lens of queer theory, which emerged during the era of AIDS. Both Dumtime's SN and Libo's Sorry for Suffering can be read as artistic practices that, while premised on various differences, seeks to explore what forms of solidarity might still be possible. This interpretation resonates with Takeda's observation of these works do not compel entry into identical communities, but rather demonstrate the possibility of solidarity based on the certain form of communality. Kazuya Kawaguchi, a pioneer of queer theory in Japan, prefaces his argument by stating that in principle, the concept queer resists theorization. Yet, if one were to attempt a definition, he writes that queer links ambiguity and interdeterminacy to the spatial construction of movements of anti-normality, represented by non-heterosexuality or anti-heterosexuality, thereby generating a dynamism that creates spaces and places for what has hitherto been denied a place. The dynamism that creates spaces for what has hitherto been denied a place by casting doubt on the false normality collaboratively constructed by the majority, often through the exclusion of minorities, perfectly describes the artistic practices of Dumtype and Libo. Judith Butler also writes about the purpose of gender trouble in the following terms as cited in Kazuta Fuditake's introduction to Butler. So gender trouble was an attempt to imagine a world in which those who live outside gender norms, in the confusion of those norms, might still be able to understand themselves not only as livable lives, but also as being worthy of recognition. The attempt to imagine a world in which people, such as homosexuals, erase of their dignity within the norms of heterosexuality, or women erase of their dignity within patriarchal society, can be understood as being worthy of recognition, is precisely what Dumtype's SN and Libo's Sorry for Suffering endeavor to enact. So similarly, Emiko Kasara's Pink series also includes Self and Others represent enlarged photographs of service tinted pink, thereby determining the various and often binary contradictory images that have historically been projected onto women. It is striking tendency that works assembled under this sanctions title, rather than reinforcing distinction between self and others, instead seem to resist and dissolving binary opposition and blurring the boundaries that divide self. So that absence of the Korean artists in Japan in the exhibition Present the Times requires critical reflection. However, I don't think it's productive to criticize such a period-defining exhibition merely by saying it is often done, there's no such and such, or so and so is missing. What does require critical imagination, though, are the structures that render people with certain attributes invisible within a given era and region. And as someone involved in the production of discourse, I must also consider this reflected in myself. So here I refer to artist Kokujun Kwak as someone who continuously visualizes the features between majority and minority in relation to ethnicity. Kwak was born in Kyoto in 1937, passed away this August. His representative series, The Present in Kwak, involved superimposing his own face into the portraits of U.S. presidents that appeared in the covers of Times magazine. Born as a Japanese during the period when the Korean peninsula was under Japanese colonial rule, later forced to live as Korean resident in post-war Japan, Kwak seems to have parodied the split nature of ethnic identity through his work. Within Japanese art history, which has long been characterized by the assumption of ethnic homogeneity, the Korean-Japanese artists have been rendered invisible and deprived of a place to belong. We must reflect critically on the continued existence of such unequal structures surrounding ethnicity, structures that were constructed through the history of imperialism and persist today. The speakers at this symposium were tasked with examining from this respective perspectives how the works exhibited in the present times have influenced later generations of artists, the challenge to create spaces and place for what has hitherto been denied a place, and the belief in art's potential to do so have indeed been inherited by subsequent artists. For example, let us consider sculpture Nodoka Odawara's installation in the exhibition, Have We Ever Become a Room for Future Artists to Rest In? Held at National Museum of Western Art, the museum's first exhibition organized by a contemporary artist. Within the exhibition space, Odawara integrated paintings by Kichi Saiko, who was born in a discriminated Buraku community and drafted Japan's first human rights declaration, the Suheisha Declaration, alongside her works. Odawara herself stated that her aim was to bring to the table, through new perspectives, issues that could not be articulated within the museum context. Odawara also crossed and blurs the boundaries between theory and practice, contributing to the production of discourse as a critic. Furthermore, she has expanded her activities beyond her own artistic practice, for instance, by creating the exhibition, the 130th Anniversary Special Exhibition, The Expressions of Mankichi Saiko, which opened earlier this week at the Suheisha Museum. Artists like Odawara has become increasingly prominent in recent years, yet as pioneers active around the period covering the Prism of the Times, one could name figures such as Kenshiro Ozaki or Yoshiko Shimada, who are not included in this exhibition. Nonetheless, the central proposition at the core of their practices resonate with that of artists discussed thus far. This is clearly articulated in anthology Art in This Country, Modern Japan, which Odawara and I co-edited in 2022. The chapter she wrote in Saiko titled Looking to the Next 100 Years, Standing at the Intersection of Japanese History and Racism. Odawara attempts to shed individual light on the figures and works that have fallen out of Japanese art history in order to explore the intersection between Japanese art history and racism. And so finally, in conclusion, the title of this presentation deprives Teiji Furuhashi's question, is art possible? A phrase that in his own words was a terribly banal proposition, so poor that it might not even be worthy to ridicule in the so called art world. Facing the inevitability of death from AIDS, Furuhashi wrote the following in a letter to his fellow members. As a means of healing the spiritual pathology that we as human beings living in contemporary society are inevitably afflicted with, art can indeed become an effective medium. I would like to believe that my choice was not mistaken, for art remains the most equitable means among those that can affect the human spirit. When Furuhashi asked, is art possible, he was, at least in part, simultaneously asking, is art effective? His letter does not explicitly specify what he meant by the spiritual pathology that we as human beings living in contemporary society are inevitably afflicted with. Yet, through the reflections so far, I have come to think that this pathology may be the human inclination to divide self and others, to assign superiority and inferiority, and to render the other invisible within society. I am not advocating for the abolition of distinctions altogether, but rather for a society that acknowledges the equality of differences and fosters the solidarity across them. This presentation, titled Is Identity Possible?, has likewise sought to ask in parallel, is identity effective? Is the concept of identity still a valid framework analyzing contemporary art practices and possibilities? The notion of identity may today sound terribly banal, a proposition so poor that it might not be worthy of ridicule in the so-called academic or critical worlds. And yet, I believe that the question of identity, particularly as manifesting the works within section, the self and others of Prism of the Times, has not lost its validity. In fact, it has become even more pertinent today. The social struggles of transgender people and their identities offer one such example. At that point, however, identity no longer refers to something innate or immutable, as suggested at the beginning. In some Foucault, David Halperin called this an identity without essence, an identity whose very essence is to have no clear content. Halperin argued that such an identity is defined only in relation to normality by its distance or difference from it. An identity without essence, then, is not a given condition, but rather a horizon of possibility, an opportunity for self-transformation, a strange potentiality. To create spaces where such identities can become visible is to expose the structures of benefit that the majority derive from arbitrarily drawing boundaries between normal and abnormal, normal and deviant and self-others. Furuhashi's question must be continuously revisited and collaboratively tested. In closing this presentation, what centered on the small voices that are violently erased, I cannot fail to mention the people of Palestine, who are still being oppressed and massacred, and to express solidarity with them. For the construction of the world in which all beings and all voices are acknowledged and respected, a world where no one is subjugated, the potential art has by no means yet been exhausted. So I think self and others, this curatorial lens really raised that as an issue. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
山本さんの発表終わります。
Thank you. That was a presentation from Mr. Yamamoto. So the next speaker is from the National Museum of Modern Art Kyoto, and also the curator of the National Museum of Art Osaka, Ms. Azusa Hashimoto. She will be focused on the Curatorial Lens 3. that is the promise of community. And so lens 1 is the passes of phantom, lens 2 is self and others. And so painting and single channel, the visual works, well, it was more of a clear tableau type of work being introduced in these previous two lenses. But lens 3, a promise of community, the artworks come under this category is not as the artwork per se, but it's more of a communication between artist and regional community, which is not visible. There are many artworks like that included in this lens 3. And some of the project born out of the collaboration among artists are some artworks which categorized under lens 3. So lens 1, to review the past, the lens 2, reflect your identity, and lens 3, understand yourself and community as a whole. So this is a more like a story of the person's life, end to end. And so Ms. Hashimoto is going to make a presentation under the lens 3, a promise of community. So, and how these events or happening can be captured through the art exhibition and through the curation and experience she gained. So I'd like to call upon Ms. Hashimoto. Thank you for the introduction. I am a curator at the National Museum of Modern Art Kyoto, as well as National Museum of Art Osaka. Nice to meet you all. And so following a footstep of the previous speakers, and I would like to begin with the picture photograph taken by Anzai Shigeo. So this is the part of the photographs I have received from him. And so the first time I worked with Mr. Anzai was when I curated the exhibition, The Destruction of the Eye, the experiment by Kashihara Etsutomu at the National Museum of Art Osaka in 2012. When Mr. Kashihara exhibited his print work, My Method, inspired by Marling, at the Paris Biennale de June in 1975, he also guerrillas style placed work throughout the city of Paris. And separate from the Biennale, Anzai photographed these actions. I asked him to exhibit them. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Anzai passed away, but because of this, I received a lot of opportunities to interact with him. And what impressed me most is what he said, and that's what he said. Hashimoto-san, you are like me. You are happening-oriented person. This is, of course, was our own playful expression, deliberately echoing the term monoha. Mr. Anzai first began taking photographs at the 10th Japan International Art Exhibition held at the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Museum in 1970, commonly known as the Tokyo Biennale. Mr. Anzai sometimes took on the role of assistant to the participating artist, capturing not only the finished works, the statistical presence, but also the process on film. This allows him to fully grasp the artist approach and express the immediacy of the scenes. So Kashihara's action in Paris were also understood within that context. Well, I believe that the term he used, the happening-oriented person, to describe me reflects an attitude that contemporary art is such a dynamic site and that is focused on the process. With this in mind, I would like to speak about today's presentation. The community is one of the topics given to me. So when we talk about community and contemporary art, many people likely think of artworks exhibited at various art festivals held in specific regions. At these festivals, it is common for artists to visit the area and sometimes staying for a while and present works that respond to the local context. The slide you are viewing shows the installation of knowing Doryun Chong, the Hakata Drive-In at this exhibition. This series of work originated from an art project conducted within the framework of a museum city project held in Fukuoka from 1990 to 2004. A Thai writer came to live in Hakata as an immigrant over the 5 years period. He unraveled the local history through encounters with a taxi driver, conversed with people, and wove it together with his own personal story. The writer was both an immigrant and researcher conducting studies on the community. When seeking to deepen our understanding of a community, history plays a crucial role. We must examine the history that has been told. There is a history spoken lightly, and conversely, the history that has not been told. There's also the question of agency, who tells a story. This will help me. And so now, fundamentally, a single person cannot create community. A community only comes into being when multiple people are present. Mesone Yutaka's early representative work is her 90th foot was presented at Art Tower Mito in 1993. This work consists of 19 specially designed unicycles, indicating the potential involvement of 19 people. Though it appears at first glance to be a large sculpture, this linked bicycle is actually rideable. The Art Tower Mito recruited 19 participants, held a 7-day public workshop, and then exhibited the work for 1 month. The workshop, of course, involves practicing riding this bicycle with 19 people. In such works, the artist is both the creator, maker, and also the facilitator. Through the work, they generate the event of a workshop, creating a community of participants. This fosters a relationship among the participants themselves and between the participants and the artist. Community takes many forms. Some are organized around towns and regions. Others are formed when people with shared goals and concerns come together more proactively. In any case, these gathered communities always involved relationships created between people. In other words, who is in a community, who is not there, who is excluded, what connection exists, and how have they changed? This is a critical point that connects to the issue self and others of identity discussed earlier by Mr. Yamamoto. So regarding these relationships created between people, which have grown increasingly important in contemporary art practice, French curator Nicolas Bouillot has discussed and used the term relational aesthetics. And after the 2000s, it became widely distributed in Japan as well, and was particularly brought up when discussing interactions between earthers and the local residents within regional communities. However, it would not be rather meaningless to simply link the various practices carried out in Japan this term. It seems natural to consider that similar tendency can be found under the concept of international contemporaneity, which is also the key theme for this exhibition. Rather, isn't it important to examine individually what specific circumstances unique to Japan were involved? And so, I want to go further into the discussion, aesthetic or relatabilities, but it's certain that the various relationships created by works and aesthetic practice have come to the value more highly. Relationships are not formed instantaneously. They are dynamic, unfolding over time, and their subtle fluctuations often lie at the core of the work. This dynamic nature of relationship is existence as an event, because increasingly prominent in practice engaged with the specific communities. Well, now shifting our perspective slightly, let's examine the communities artists create among themselves. Even just within the Prism exhibitions and its catalog, we found reference to the Nakamura and Murakami exhibition, a small village center, and the Gimbal Art, Shinjuku Shonen Art, and Group 1965. And so these activities as an artist collective have sometimes been limited or intermittent, while other times they have taken a form of a specific exhibitions or project, remaining loosely connected. While it may be simplistic to lump together such diverse practices, I would like to point out one common thread among those activities: the use of technique like a parody and simulation, and along with a critical perspective on social context, the art world, and history of contemporary art. What you're reviewing exhibition is a Season Man work, Chapter 3, Welcome to Season Olympic. Season Man is a collective formed in 2007 by 3 writers, Tsuyoshi Ozawa, Chang Xiaoyong, and Kim Hong-sok. And Season is an imaginary city-state in East Asia, and the works of Season Man artists were set in a city-state. Satire of various absurdities of modern society while presenting their creations. This work is, needless to say, a parody of the Olympics. It playful transcends the tensions between East Asian nations, Japan, China, and South Korea, while humorously critiques the Olympics by redefining the game's rules and mechanism, dislocating the framework of competing while representing one's country. Behind this lies the question: what are the essential conditions for the nation? What mechanism make a nation strong? What desire exists, and who drive those desires? One of the members, Ozawa Tsuyoshi, critiques Japan's unique rental gallery system through the Nasubi Gallery project, also featured in this exhibition while involving contemporary artists. Additionally, together with Takashi Murakami and Hideki Nakazawa, the 3 formed a small village center and carried out Osaka cleanup project in an underground shopping arcade of Umeda, Osaka. This is, needless to say, a parody of a high-red center formed by Jiro Takamatsu and Genpei Akazawa and Natsuyuki Nakanishi, and is also based on the happening metropolitan area cleanup and organization promotion campaign that HRC carried out just before the Tokyo Olympics. It can be noted that some movements attempted to reinterpret and reconceptualize the art would be contemporary art history through technology and parody and simulation emerged from these communities. Viewing artists practice since 1990s when community-based art festival proliferated an artist in residence program gained momentum through the lens of community, revealed diverse development set in cities and regions. And there, the topic of relationship emerges, extending beyond the relationship between artists and viewers mediated by the work itself to encompass relationship within existing communities as well as those between outsiders and insiders of these communities. Moreover, the history of the community, the social context, art history, and the art world, the very foundation of such relationships, have also been actively re-examined in the creation of the works and projects. In response to those developments since the 2000s, the number of research-based works has increased dramatically. A major factor in that after 2000, the internet rapidly became widespread, databases were established, and it became easier for people beyond specialized researchers to conduct investigation across various fields of expertise. Furthermore, the widespread adoption of smartphones and similar devices has made recording and editing photos and videos extremely easy. The outcome of such research are often composed of video archive materials, photographs, and other elements forming works in the form of a complex installation. Furthermore, it is not uncommon for workshop, performance, or discussion to deepen the investigation or serve as a core of the work. The works viewed at the exhibition space sometimes take the form of a single output, yet the long-term project itself carried out prior to this holds significant importance. Thus, the event-like nature of artist practice has become extremely significant today. Time-based media, works whose very act of viewing unfolded temporally have become commonplace, and audience participatory performance and workshop format works are no longer rare. The presenter began curatorial practice while working at the museum specializing in contemporary art, precisely within the context. Finally, I will present an example of such initiatives. Next slide, please. And so most recent project, personally, this is the I'll discuss today was serving as a co-curator for the Roppongi Crossing exhibition held at the Mori Art Museum in 2022, alongside Kenichi Kondo of the Mori Art Museum, Taro Amano of the Opera City Art Gallery, and Lena Fritsch of the Musée Odyssey. And this planning for this exhibition began in the spring of 2021, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, responding to the social situation which was gradually recovering after the disruption of the movement in logistics. The exhibition title was set as Roppongi Crossing 2022 exhibition coming up. Particularly within the genre of contemporary art, this situation where neither artists nor curators and sometimes not even the works themselves move and where AIR program cannot be established gave us much to consider. And not only that, but I personally felt a strong sense of crisis about the harmful effect of idea like preventing viruses from being brought in front of sight, idea rooted in xenophobia and the drawbacks of purity and obsessive cleanliness. We were able to introduce artists' attempt to imaginatively overcome such situations and exhibit works expressing this richness, including friction brought by the human interactions and expansion of relationship. This slide shows the Gamma's Lunch series by the Tatsuya Orimoto exhibited at a Crossing exhibition. Invited to Evora, Portugal, and Orimoto hosted a lunch for 500 local grandmothers. He served the food like a waiter and dressed as his signature breadman. I believe that the time spent sharing the meal together was a rich event, a performance, a party, and an occasion to nurture neighborly love and compassion, to warm old friendship, and to celebrate new encounters. And from 2015 to 2016, I participated as a co-curator for the exhibition as Time of Others, a collaborative project with the Japan Foundation Asian Center. And so the exhibition toured each museum with gradually changing participating artists and works organized by Miss Che Kim-fa of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Tokyo and Miss Michelle Ho of Singapore Art Museum and Mr. Ruben Kihan of Queensland Gallery. This exhibition was a group show featuring artists primarily from the Asia or Oceanic region, yet the exhibition title deliberately omitted the word Asia. Since the 1990s, opportunities to introduce contemporary art from East Asia and Southeast Asia have increased within Japan, and discussion about a broader region of Asia have been ongoing. And so the question about what Asia is and where it refers to cannot be addressed without a multifaceted examination of a modern and contemporary history, which colonialism has further complicated. Throughout the 1990s and 2000, the Japan Foundation opened the forum for such discussions, promoting intellectual exchange among artists, curators, and researchers involved in contemporary art. For example, the Symposium content Before You Say Asia or Asia After Art After a Postmodernism held in JF in 2008 can be considered one of its regular events. After this debate and persisted for a long time, our curatorial team set aside the existing discussion evoked by the term Asia and planned this exhibition as an attempt to correctly consider connections and divisions with our neighbors. This slide shows Thai artist and Pracha Pinton's work gave more than you take. And as exhibited at the National Museum of Art Osaka, this work is composed of multiple events of communities. When Pinto was invited to France's AIR program, instead of staying there, he traveled to Sweden with the Thai workers hired for the berry harvest and stayed for 2 months. Every day he reported the weight of the harvested berries to the residence curator and instructed them to gather materials of equivalent weight for the gallery. The project ultimately resulted in 549 kilograms of artwork equivalent to the total weight of berries harvested in Sweden over the 2 month period. From then on, whenever this work was exhibited, the curator would consider what exactly to display within the 549 kilograms. And so at NMAO, we gathered several sculptures with the goal of achieving a total weight of approximately 549 kilograms, completing the work in the form of a mini exhibitions. So within the concept of a berry picking by immigrant laborers, the exhibition features Henry Moore's Cup of Fruit, or Yoshinobu Yanagihara's Crow, and Michael Heiser's Sacrifice. And next, I'll discuss the activities of The Play, a group that has been active in the Kansai region since 1967. The play is a group that has continued what we now call a performance-based activities together with a fluid membership to plan, prepare, execute, and report the project. They called this a performance, an action, originally starting their activities in the 1960s within the context of a critique of the museum system. From the 1970s onwards, they pursue more freely the very back and forth between extraordinary experience and everyday life. For those involved in contemporary art, particularly in the Kansai region, the importance of a play was self-evident. And however, because the work were events and a comprehensive retrospective exhibition at the museum has been realized. I sense the possibility that play might slip out of the history, so I proceeded with the research into the photograph and ephemera, along with the interview with the members. And so this led me to organize the retrospective exhibition, The Play since 1967, towards the unseen current beyond in 2016. And so while we also hold archive material for the exhibition, we focus on the efforts on expressing the event-like nature of play work by the artist's dynamic creative presence. We employ life-size reproductions and other methods to avoid giving the exhibitions the feel of the mere documentary display. The research Hashimoto conducted starting in 2011 was just published as a book this past March, so please take a look. This is just a promotion. So finally, I will introduce the collection of a performance artwork in fiscal year 2016. The same year, the play exhibition was held at the NMAO, established a collection category titled Performance, like Western artwork and Japanese artwork. So the work you are currently viewing is a performance of a short performance story commissioned from Singapore artist Jihye Yun for an exhibition commemorating the 40th anniversary of the National Museum of Art Osaka. This is a work where a short story written by the author is orally transmitted from the instructor to participants, and only the instructor and participants know the contents of the story. And the performance will take place in an exhibition room and presenting the event itself as an exhibit. While this photograph is not a staged photo, it shows participants and the instructor actually performing. The instructor is Ms. Yun, who was working as MC today, and back then she was working for the National Museum of Art Osaka. So, in summary, how to collect events like this, and how to properly ensure their artistic merit while repeatedly exhibiting them. This is a major challenge for a museum. However, in recent times, when such forms of work have become extremely universal, and actively engaging in collection and exhibition is one of the critical tasks for a museum collecting contemporary artworks. So this is precisely the question of how to engage with the dynamism of contemporary art, and it also means continuing to ask how to overcome the institutional rigidity of organization. So with this, I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
橋本さん、ありがとうございました。私は
Hashimoto-san, thank you so much. At the outset, I was so nervous I forgot to introduce her. But it was introduced earlier. She has recent publications on play. It's available at the bookstore, so if you get a chance, please read it. So Hashimoto-san, thank you. Then let's do a Q&A session at this point in time. We'd also like to have some discussion time as well. So Isabella, Cho-san, Yamamoto-san, can you also join the stage?
Thank you. Three really wonderful, amazing presentation by the colleagues. And instead of like a question, I actually have an immediate comment to the presentation, because like while listening to your presentation, that there is certain keyword that actually kind of pop up in my mind, especially the idea, the keyword of the other. Even though your presentation, you're dealing with different topic in the exhibition, but it kind of like pretty kind of come up again in different aspect, or even like in different or in different phases, really kind of suggesting the importance of the others in your presentations. And but just a little bit of comment, just like as we are kind of preparing of this exhibition, and I really kind of came across this very proposal by the social historian called Mulai Noriko, which I think is a very interesting point, that she pointed out that the period of 1989 to 2019, that the Heisei period, while we are thinking that Heisei is like a Genko, it's like an era name, but at the same time, it really kind of reminds us that there are so many different forces and the event really kind of like challenging, or like really made us to aware about what is the reality of Japan during this period of the time. And in that case, it really kind of, she's kind of proposing the idea that perhaps maybe we should think about the idea of Heisei should be more than a Genko, but it's more like a concept to raise our way to think about Japan. There are many factors in the way of shaping about the country, how its look, how its culture, and also its contemporary identity. So in that case, I'm just kind of like thinking about this idea of the idea when you mentioned from Cho-san presentation that you discuss about like the definition of Japanese history, that the idea of the other, like the peripheral history really kind of come about. And also in Yamamoto-san, your presentation that you talk a lot about like the invisible, or like the small voices, right? And then in Hashimoto-san, your presentation, you really kind of talk about like the notion about the diversity and also the community, like the importance of the others. So in that case, my question would be really kind of like to you is, to three of you, is like how you think this notion about, or like this keyword of other could be actually a very useful tool for us to really kind of think about the canon of Japanese, of making art in Japan, or even in the way of how our criticism can be tackled in Japan. Who wants to start first?
Isabella さんに So let me answer Isabella's question. When I talk about others, it's about existentialism. So about existentialism, someone that's different from me, something that's different from me, and I think this is more of a structural idea, but I guess, something, this idea of heterogeneity. So from looking from other people, that's something that's not mainstream, that's something different, that's not something homogeneous. So I guess it's actually referring to the same thing. So for me, it's important to be able to, my mission, I guess, in my life is to really pick out, identify, and really save the heterogeneity. So for me, that's a motivation in terms of others. Thank you. This is actually a very difficult question. Like Cho-san, maybe I can answer from my perspective only, but as you had rightly said, at the end of 1989. So that's after the bubble burst in Japan. And I guess that was about the time that I was born as well. And until then, Japan was going through a high economic growth. And you mentioned about reality earlier, but this was a time in which Japan had to re-examine its own identity. So, for example, the high economic growth came from the special demand from the Korean Peninsula War. So there was, a lot of repression at that time as well. So those are things that we also need to reflect on as well. But when we say self and others, and as I had said in my presentation, when we say others, we make ourselves heterogeneous, and perhaps we have excluded others' existence. We made it ourselves a norm, and I think the only thing we can do is to shed light on that. So it's not just about identifying that, discovering that, and trying to present that, but I think for me, it's not just about throwing people violently into that mode, but whatever that was not considered to be a norm, how could those, that's different, something that's been different from us, that's not our norm, intersect and collide, and how could that transform? What's the possibility of transformation? So I think this is something that I want to do as a curator too. And that's a big question, so it's not easy to answer. But in this earlier exhibition, there's an exhibition called Time of Others, and Chapter 2, or Curatorial Lens 2, is about self and others in this exhibition. So it's about self and others, or majority and minority. So it's binary. Or dichotomy. And of course, it's not just about that. I think there's a dynamism in trying to break down that just simple binary. So I wanted to put a more focus on minority. And there's a lot of curatorial practices that's focused on minority in order to break down that binary or dichotomy. But what I want to be cautious about personally is that because I work for a national museum, that's where my practice is. So Cho-san criticized tokenism, but majority tends to speak about minority in a very ambiguous way, and I think I want to be sure I'm cautious about that.
ありがとうございます。そうです。
Thank you. It should not be used as an alibi. That is a good point. And so we receive a question from those two, but before I open the floor for Q&A, so among three speakers, I would like to encourage you to ask questions among yourself, and what are the commonalities and what are the uniqueness. Maybe I could ask these. So first, Ms. Cho. So most important and heavy theme, that is who should tell the story of history and whose history should be told. And so that is of the main players and how to select and narrating history. So when it comes to the curation and curatorial practice and going forward, I think you have shown the very difficult insight. And so what you have learned from the presentation made by Mr. Yamamoto and Mr. Hashimoto. So those two presentation is there a lot to learn for me. So that's the very insightful presentation. So I thought there were many similarities after listening to those two, and others meaning that heterogeneity, but sometimes good to be told from the philosophical point of view. But heterogeneity is more to do with the structure, especially the Yamamoto-san focus on dumb type, and also the Kakudokushin's artwork being featured, and so Korean was used as a foundation. And so engage in activities and a more critical perspective was what we've been presented. And Ms. Hashimoto is exhibiting the event-based artworks. And so I was very interested in what he does. So, and homogeneity and being a mainstream, and both of you is a bit rebellious about those two. So getting closer to heterogeneity, I think there is a high motivation I see in both of them. And so where that come from? That is a source of motivation. And to me, well, it is more. Well, if it's there's a linear line connecting the heterogeneity and homogeneity, and to put it in a rough way, where do you think that it lies? And so that's a more difficult question than the previous question to me. When I started thinking about where I began with what we do, so my position, well, because I live in Japan, so in my ways, I belong to a majority. So what I perceive as the normal, well, is only come to being because of the many assumptions or what's taken in as a common sense. Because I have spent some times overseas, like in Hong Kong and other parts of the world, and so being minority, and that is where I am, is what I have affirmed when I was spending time outside. So what I consider as a normal life, there is something that you do not discover or acknowledge, and how that should be considered, and that is one of the source of motivation. And so without noticing the privilege that I've been taken away from others, and how I can redeem that, is a question that I asked to myself. Of course, there's something that I would like to get closer to and also gain better understanding. But rather than directly approaching that to find out, but after understanding what the privileges that I have. And so when you think about the linear lines, and so I need to acknowledge that I'm very close to a minority, and then start from there to find out the real state of where I am. There were two questions, right? So the first question is motivation, social motivation. I'm sorry, I was so indulged in what others were saying. So being with the National Museum of Art, Osaka, so I'm somewhere in the middle. It seems to be seen like that by others. But 2008, I've been with the this National Museum of Art, Osaka. What's unique is that this is situated in Osaka. And so we are the only national museum specialized in modern art. If this is situated in Tokyo, our narrative could have been different. And central and peripheral, well, the sense of issue was inherent within myself from the start. And also, I'm a female. So when I started working at the museum, because there were different barriers and also there were many struggles that I went through. Even now, well, the core interest of authors or artists are there. So to diversity and to peripherality and how they view and how they interpret those aspects. And I work with them to form this kind of exhibition and Mr. Stomichi's Tori series. And that was also the occasion where I learned more about the aspect of others. So it was quite natural when it comes to the curatorial interest of mine. So the question posed by Mr. Yamamoto is a question posed to Ms. Cho and Ms. Hashimoto as well. So Yamamoto-san, and so a public biennale in last year, and so you did the experience of curating that Japan Pavilion. So being shouldered the burden of representing the state or the national exhibition, I heard the struggle that you went through during the negotiation of the preparation. And so with that in mind, could you ask questions to Ms. Cho and Ms. Hashimoto? And so I would like to hear from the audience. I would like to be brief. As you say, and Guangzhou Biennale, And that was a very rare opportunity for me. That's why I decided to accept that offer. And so Gwangju Biennale has a very unique history, and the Western style national pavilion system being introduced. And as a latecomer, and there was a criticism from the audience or the society, but even so, I wanted to do so because let it go of the concept of a national, and there is much to be left to do. So what's been left as a legacy from the national, without considering that issues, we cannot move on to the post-national. So the concept of a national, without letting that go, under the concept of building pavilion as a curation, I try to envisage what the concept should be. So my question to both of you is a concept of national in the world of curation, with this is the still effective, or how do you see that?
まあ複数
when we talk about nationality, sometimes you write it, there's a multiplicity. And I think in Guangzhou, we didn't write it. But I'm curious about what you think about nationality. So with regards to Guangzhou Biennale, even from the preparatory stage, I was hearing from Yamamoto-san about your stories. I know I empathize with you about all the challenges that you had to go through. And if I was in your shoes, I would be in the same position and I would be struggling with the same issues. My research theme is diaspora art. And so diaspora are people who are migrating from or away from nation state. So whether which passport you have, what's your nationality, which language do we speak, what family background do they have, those are the things that I would investigate first and foremost, because that's an important information. So you can't break away from nation state and nationality. And in a sense, that's something that actually is a mechanism that allows you to highlight the minorities. So nationality is becoming a monster. It's transforming itself to a monster, I think. But so we need to kind of remember that but also think about nationality from that perspective. So I know I'm not answering the question, but that's what I think. So we see, people moving towards the right, conservatism, not just in Japan, but all around the world. And so in my practice, though, because I work for a national museum, I do have to think about the nation. What is our direction? But I also look at outside of Japan as well. When we think about our activities, I make sure that I research about what's happening around the world. Otherwise, you can't think about what's the best for Japan. So especially in the last few years in collection building, we do want to collect the Japanese artists, but we want to also focus on the artists from Southeast Asia, which we have really not been able to have a good collection before yet. So the neighboring Asian nations. So we do surveys and researches, and so nationalism for us is a point of reflection, in a kind of internal reflection. So this is a short answer. Thank you. So Hashimoto-san, questions to the two other panelists? Play exhibition and Hime-chan's performance. I did that with you, Hashimoto-san. So this is, I guess, my question for you. But in the recent years, we see a lot of research-based artworks. But it's difficult to enjoy them with the stronger visual artworks. And I think play exhibition had artistic significance, and it was a fun experience for us. But this is event-based work. So is there any method in which we can enjoy the research-based works? At least, if there's any personal ways that you enjoy, Hashimoto-san, would you be able to share that? And also ask questions to your two panelists. That's a difficult question. Enjoy. So what does it mean to enjoy? Who enjoys? I guess that's what I was thinking of myself. But in terms of the play exhibition, so this was, I thought, an exhibition just reading the works of the artists of over 40 years would be a little difficult. So I didn't want it to do the scenography where I would just have cases and cases of displays of materials of 40 years of worth of artists. So I wanted to focus on plays. So I wanted to focus on the outdoor nature of these artists who were very much active outside, outdoors. And as I was discussing that with the artists themselves, I wanted to see how we can specifically express that in this exhibition. So that was one of the ways to solve this issue in the play exhibition. And of course, it depends on the artwork. It's really case by case. So let me ask questions for the two colleagues. With regards to dynamism, keep that in mind. So for Cho-san, you talked about outliers. And Yamamoto-san, you talked about identity. So there's a swing. You don't speak about minority as something that's fixed. That's something that I really empathized. So would you be able to get would I be able to get a comment on that? So can I talk about the research base real quick? Because in Guangzhou Biennale, other than to give a concept, I didn't do much curation. And so, but one thing that what I did is to do research, to put aside all the researches and long sentences and long text into the backstage. I think research is important, but exhibition is not something where you showcase the output of your research, but your bodily senses of the artist and curators. How is that being, delivered as an output? I think that's more important, especially as a language, as a discourse. So, of course, there are many wonderful research-based artworks, but for me, I wanted to have an alternative to that. And that's one thing that I think I was able to accomplish at Guangzhou Biennale. So so I forgot my question. Oh, okay. So, about majority and minority. And of course, that border is very ambiguous sometimes. But what I think always is, in terms of minority, is their existence and history is not a cornerstone for learning about minorities, or it's not a material for art. It's really about how I can transform. Without me transforming, changing, I will not be able to look at others. So that for me is dynamism. How could I change from others? Or how could others change me? And through that, I think we are able to see more important issues or material points. And then to me, that is a dynamism. So with regards to dynamism, bees are attracted to flowers that are moving, that are swinging. So you have to move, otherwise people won't notice, and that carries the seas, and that crosses borders. So swinging or moving, for me, in creation practice, is most important. It's not just about outputting information. I want the audience, the viewers, hearts to be moved. And how did that exhibition touch people? How did that move people? I think that's a contribution that curators can give or make to the artists. Thank you.
で8は動く
So the last comment, so the bees flying and attracted to moving flowers, that was a good comment. So what was fortunate is that it's 5 sharp, and we wanted to close. We wanted to receive questions from the audience, but we all need to move to the next venue to Outweek Jihye. So for those who have questions, maybe you could approach us later. So with this, we would like to end the discussion and the symposium. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. So please join me in offering a big round of applause to all the speakers.